In this screencast, we'll be working through the installation steps for the MEANR full stack. This is the Unix version. At the end of the screencast, we'll have the MEANR web application running on our local machine. Here's a screenshot of the home page, sign up page, list articles page, create a new article page, and edit an existing article page. We'll be working mostly on the Unix command line. We'll begin by cloning the repository, installing git flow, installing dependencies with npm and bower, initializing the MEANR application default configuration, spin up and update the virtual machine, run our DevOps on the virtual machine with Chef Solo, and start the MEANR web app, and then view the WebRMean app in a browser. So some quick notes. The screencast is recorded at 800 by 600 pixels, and the recording will pause and resume on long-running operations. So we'll begin by getting over to the home page for the MEANR stack at GitHub, and we're going to scroll down a little bit to this workflow graphic. Where we'll be working in today's screencast is here on the local machine using the develop branch. What we're going to install on the local machine is the MEANR local stack, Node running an Express web server serving Angular pages, and inside VirtualBox we'll install Ubuntu 12.4 LTS, and then inside Ubuntu we'll be installing MongoDB and Redis databases. So back at the top of the page, we'll scroll down a bit again into the docs folder and into the installation document. So we're going to work through this document for the screencast. The overview preamble we just went through. First up, look at the core concepts. So a key principle and use of the MEANR stack is deploying the application through several environments. In this screencast, we'll be focusing on the local development. Future screencasts will be looking at local deployment, a staging deployment, QA deployment, and production deployment. This is the Unix version of the screencast, so we'll be editing our etc. host file. Instead of each environment has an IP number, and we'll map this to a host name. So for localhost, we'll map to meanr.local, and a local net will map to dev.meanr.com. Now, in your real world scenario, you would replace mean with your own domain name. meanr.com is actually unavailable, but it doesn't really matter for our purposes, as we can map it in our host file. So we'll step into the installation steps. First thing you'll need to do, I'll let you run this by yourself, I've already done it, is install globally grunt, CLI, and bower. After that's completed, we're going to clone the repository and CD into it. Alright, so the repository is cloned. We'll now CD into it. Next up, we want to install git flow. So we run git flow init. Here we'll just accept all the defaults, and that's going to drop us in onto the develop branch. Now we'll initialize the Node application. We'll install our Node dependencies with npm install. With npm install completed, we can see that it's downloaded a whole bunch of Node modules, and it's also downloaded Phantom.js, which we'll be using for our AngularJS unit tests. Next up, we'll install our front-end dependencies with bower. We'll run bower install. Okay, with bower install finished, we can see that it's downloaded Angular and jQuery, etc. We'll take a quick look at those in our app directory, bower components. You can see there Angular, Foundation, etc. And we'll take a quick look here also in our boa rc file. This is where it specifies what directory they'll go into at boa components. Alright, next up we're going to copy all the example configuration files into place with a grunt task, grunt init. So what that's done is copied 11 files. Take a quick look at some of those. So here in our config directory, there's an example directory, and inside there is a config.js. So this is inside the Git repository. When we run the grunt init command, this config file is copied back one place into here. Inside here we'll set application specific settings like cookie secret, session secret, and also your client IDs and secret IDs for your social logins. So this particular file is not in the Git repository. We'll keep our sensitive configuration data not in the Git repository, and this will be SSH directly onto the remote servers during deployment. We'll look at that in future videos. We'll also see here the config.js includes an environment specific JSON file, and those are in the environment folder here. Again, there's an example folder, and these 4 development, production, test, and Travis JSON files have been copied back here, and these are also excluded from the Git repository. Inside here are settings, for example, on which Mongo database to connect to. In development mode, which is where we'll be in today, we'll be connecting to the MEANR.dev Mongo database, and in production mode, it will be connecting direct to a MEANR database. Okay, so after running grunt init, the Node application is pretty much set up and ready to go, but we don't yet have a MongoDB or Redis database to connect to. So this is now where we will step into the DevOps side of things. We're going to create our virtual machine running Ubuntu 12.4, and then we'll install into that MongoDB and Redis. So we'll cd into the chef directory and run the bundle command. The bundle is a Ruby command, and we'll download our Ruby dependencies. So we'll cd into the chef directory and run the bundle command. We can see here everything's up to date. Next thing, we'll spin up our Vagrant machine. Now just before we do that, we'll take a quick look at the Vagrant file, which specifies our virtual machine settings. Now this Vagrant file only has 4 changes from what comes out as default. We'll give our virtual box a name called Precise64, and we configure a box URL. So if you haven't got this box already, it's going to be downloaded from files.vagrantup.com. We've uncommented this line here, so we have a private network and an IP assigned our virtual machine, and we've also added in a name MEANR.local stack to our virtual box. So we'll run Vagrant up. Okay, so our Vagrant machine has booted up. It's imported the base box and started the machine. We can SSH into it with the Vagrant SSH command. So you can see here we're running Ubuntu 12.4 LTS server. So we'll exit out of there and go back to the documents. So after the VM is started, we want to download and install our Chef community cookbooks using Berkshelf. So we'll cd into the kitchen, and then we'll run Berks vendor. Cd into the kitchen, Berks vendor. Our Berkshelf will now go out and download from the Opscode site and GitHub and the recipes that we've specified in our cookbooks. Alright, Berks is here completed now. You can see he's downloaded our required recipes and vendored them. Vendored meaning installed them. So you can see here in our kitchen, Berks cookbooks. These are the ones that we just downloaded and installed. So the rest of our DevOps commands are command line operations. So rather than type them out, we're going to use a utility wrapper script using Thor. And Thor is a toolkit for building powerful command line interfaces. The first thing we want to do is add our SSH key to the virtual machine so that our following SSH commands can be run without a password. So our wrapper script commands are done using Thor, and we'll take a quick look here. In the kitchen, there is a devops.thor file, and inside there are various commands: upgrade, rebuild, which we're going to look at now. So the first one we're going to run is Thor devops SSH copy ID. It's going to copy our SSH ID. Now the Vagrant user's password is the word Vagrant. So user Vagrant, password Vagrant. So we'll enter in Vagrant. Now with our SSH key copied in, our future SSH commands can be done without a password. So we have a running Ubuntu server, but the first thing we want to do is update and upgrade the box. So we get the latest security patches and latest running kernel. So we'll issue the Thor devops upgrade command. So we can see here the script has output some debugging information. It's running in the development environment, and it's going to be working on vagrant@dev.meanr.com. And what this wrapper command has actually issued is this command: ssh vagrant@dev.meanr.com sudo aptitude update and sudo aptitude safe upgrade. Basically going to just update the box. And previously, because we added our SSH key, we didn't need to enter the password again for this command to run. So we'll just pause here and come back when that's finished. Alright, with that now finished, we can move on to the next command. So our Ubuntu box, at the end of a full-on upgrade like that, it's good policy or good practice to reboot the machine. So the wrapper command also issued sudo init6, so the box is rebooting. Now what's typically going to happen is on that first big upgrade is the Linux kernel itself is going to upgrade, and that's going to break the VirtualBox guest editions that we have installed. So what we need to do is rebuild those, and we can rebuild those with the Thor devops rebuild command. So we will run that. We can see here what it's doing is issuing the Vagrant SSH command sudo aptitude install curl build essential dkms, which is required to rebuild the VirtualBox extensions, and then running the vbox setup command. Okay, with the virtual extensions rebuilt, the machine will reboot itself again. So now we have a running, fully up-to-date Ubuntu 12.4 server. The VirtualBox extensions have been rebuilt to match the new kernel. Now we need to install onto our virtual server the DevOps software. We're going to do this by downloading and installing Chef with the Chef Omnibus installer. Our wrapper command for that is Thor DevOps Bootstrap. Okay, that's complete. So off camera I ran this command. Chef's already installed, so this time around to run it's just output Chef's okay. But what it would do is if Chef wasn't installed would be to curl download the Omnibus installer and just install it. So now we have our working Ubuntu server. It's completely up to date, all the security patches, the latest kernel. It's been bootstrapped with Chef Solo, so we're now ready to install our software like MongoDB and Redis. Okay, so before we proceed into our DevOps Chef run, there's a couple of configuration things we should update. Inside our JSON file for our DevOps Chef Solo, we need to update our email address. So we'll come along here into the Chef directory, into the kitchen, into the nodes, into the dev.meanr.com.json file. You can see here there's two places where it needs an email address. So put in your email address, place twice. We'll save that. And what we also want to do is copy in our SSH public key into the deploy.json file. which is going to be the name of our deployment user, and that's in the databags users directory. So a quick shortcut for that would be to we'll cat our SSH public key into the databags users deploy.json file, and we'll have a look at that file in our editor. Databags users deploy, there's my SSH key appended to the end of the file, so we'll copy that, and that will go into the SSH key setting here. Paste, save. Okay, done. So with the dev.MEANR.json file updated and deploy.json file also updated, we can now proceed. One thing we can also quickly do here is run some tests against our virtual machine. Nope, sorry, we'll do that after we cook. We're ready to cook. We'll take a quick look at the cook, what's going to happen here. So if we look inside our node dev.MEANR.json file, scroll to the end here, we'll see the run list. So the run list has got 3 entries, a base role, a MEANR role, and a development branch role. If we have a look in our roles, we can see the base role. So the base role has its own run list. It's going to run a hostname recipe, apt-get periodic recipe, postfix. It's going to configure our mail server. It's going to install unattended upgrades so that security patches are pumped in automatically. It's also going to install some default packages, and it's going to create the deploy user, which is the data bag we just updated. The MEANR.json file is the bulk of our MEANR application, so we can see in here it's going to do things like install Redis, install Mongo, install Node. This same machine is also going to be used for the next stage, which is the local development deployment. So the script is also going to install Nginx and set up sudo and some syscontrol. And the develop branch is just going to install NTP. In master, it's also NTP, but we have some Datadog server monitoring, and we'll look at this in a future screencast. So we're all set to run our, what we've been working towards, run our DevOps command, which is Thor DevOps cook. Oops. So this will take a while, and I'll pause the video and come back when it's complete. Alright, so the Chef solo run has completed. It took a little while as it had to download all the software required. We can just scroll up a little here and have a look at some of the output. It should have done a number of things. It should have installed MongoDB, it should have installed Redis, it should have configured our mail server, it also should have installed some default packages. So we can log in now manually and check that that's all okay. There was no error output by the script, so we can assume that it all ran okay. Or rather than that, we can run some automated tests to check our work. So we're using an RSpec type test suite called server spec, and inside the spec directory, or inside our kitchen, inside our spec directory, we've got a base, development, master branch, and MEANR, and each one of these folders corresponds to a role. So if we have a look here in the MEANR.json role, we can see that it should have installed and enabled Redis, and it should have installed and enabled MongoDB. It should also have installed Nginx, installed a startup script for our Node application. So for each one of these recipes or things that it should have done, we'll have a matching test. So for example here, we can look at the MongoDB spec. So from the MEANR role, the Mongo recipe, we've written a couple of specs. So Our apt sources list should have a 10gen list file. MongoDB should be installed, and it should be listening on port 27017. So we'll run this script and it will run all these tests for us and confirm whether our chef run has been successful or not. So back in the docs we can see two commands, rake and rake server spec dev. So we'll have a look at rake-t to start with, -T, and this is going to list out all the available commands. So there's actually we can run the specs, the same spec test on each of the 4 servers we're going to end up with. Right now we only have the one, we have the server spec dev server. So we'll run this command here, rake server spec dev. This one won't take too long, so here we are. It's run all the specs, it's all in the green, 45 tests, 0 failures. So we know for sure that our server is correctly configured. Nginx is installed, it's listening, the application directory is writable, etc, etc, etc. So now at this point we are at the end of the application steps. So what we can do is start up our local Express server. So what we'll do first up is we'll take 2 steps back, cd back twice, and there's a default grunt task to fire up the web server. Fire up the Express web server, it's just grunt. So we'll run grunt. It takes a few moments to think. Okay, that's started up. First thing to notice is there's no logging output. So we'll have a quick look here at our Express configuration. So in the config, Express.js, we'll scroll down and we'll see that logging is configured to use a log file. HTTP logging and also error logging, and that's in the log directory. So we'll just take a quick look in there. ls log, we can see there's a development log, so we'll tail that. So Mongo is listening, Mongo is connected, Express is listening, and it's also our Redis connection is ready. So now we'll flip over to a browser, open a new tab, MEANR .local:3000. Bang, there is our MEAN application up and running. Sign in, sign up, about us page. There is no articles, so the database is empty. We can't sign in either because we don't have any user account. So what we can do is we can sign up. An option here now is to seed the database with a seeding script. So using Capistrano, we can run a Capistrano task, cap local mongo seed, and we can also drop all the data, cap local mongo drop. So we'll run the bundle command again to make sure everything's good. Stop the server here, run the bundle command. Make sure our Capistrano everything's installed correctly, yes it is. So we can run our Capistrano task, cap local mongodb underscore seed. What this will do is SSH over some seed data and pump it into the database. So now we'll restart our server, reload the web application. So the article, now we have 8 demo articles with some lorem ipsum text. We also have a user account set up, and that user is called net citizen. So if we have a quick look again in our environment development configuration, net@citizen.com with the password of ABCDEF. So we'll copy that. net@citizen ABCDEF. Oops, so because we're at 800 by 600, the header here is bent on us. We're logged in here as user at NetCitizen, so if we list our articles, article 8, we can edit an article, article 8, 101, update, list articles, article 8, 101. So there we go. MEANR up and running. So the next screencast is going to be on workflow and testing. There's a whole range of tests we can run: AngularJS tests, Node tests, model tests, and it also comes with coverage reports. And we'll also look at saving changes on the development branch and committing those and deploying them into the local development environment. Thanks for watching.